the question about divestment is partly about having an effect, and it's also about safeguarding our investments. I don't want to know that my pension or that my neighbour's pension is invested in an industry which is not going to be worth what it is on paper by the time we start drawing our pensions. The fossil fuel industry is not a safe bet for the future, and so we shouldn't be staking our economic futures on it. But the second aspect of it is that as public investors move away from the fossil fuel industry, that creates a wider economic climate. Billions have already been taken out of the fossil fuel industry by cities, by states, by universities, by churches, by big socially conscious investors around the world. The divestment movement is really powerful, and it is helping to raise questions in the wider economy about the future of the fossil fuel industry. So it's partly about safeguarding our investments for the future, and it's also about sending a signal to our wider economy that says, look, this is not going to be the future, and we need to be looking at alternatives. It also, of course, frees up all of that investment, not just from things like public pension funds, but from Scottish enterprise budget, from a whole host of other areas. It frees up that investment to be putting into the positive, to be putting into the socially and environmentally beneficial industries of the future. And that fundamentally is what transition needs to be about. People throw around this phrase, a just transition, recognizing that we don't want to repeat the deindustrialization of the 80s, where whole communities were left on the economic scrap heap. If we're going to transition away from the fossil fuel industries, from the high carbon, intensive, damaging industries, we need to be investing in an alternative. We need to be investing in the industries of the future that can meet people's economic needs sustainably and without trashing the planet. And we need to be directing that investment, and I believe that the state has a critically important role. If we leave it to the market, it simply will not happen on the scale and the pace that it's needed. I'll touch very briefly on the two other issues you mentioned. Carbon taxes are at the moment outwith the scope of what the Scottish Parliament can do. It's been dealt with at European level, I think, by half measures. It hasn't been dealt with in the really powerful way that it could have been. But at least being part of the European Union gave us the opportunity to have our say in what those EU-wide systems ought to be. Now that we're being taken out of the EU, and the UK would have responsibility for those issues rather than the Scottish government, I think we have a really serious job of work to do to try and argue what should be the economic nature of how the UK not only prices carbon in our own economy, but plugs back into that wider European and global economy. On land, very briefly, there's far more positive suggestions that we can bring forward and that will be in the Green Manifesto on land, because these are well within the scope of devolution, well within the ability of the Scottish Government. We should not be allowing a fifth of the land mass of Scotland to be used for hunting, shooting, and rural pastimes for the super rich. We should be reforesting and rewilding a huge amount of our land, mostly emphasizing native species rather than mass production of Sitka spruce or whatever it would have been in previous decades. It still goes on too much. We should be doing that to boost biodiversity, to ensure that the carbon capture benefits are maintained, but also forestry can be an incredibly productive form of industry, as many of our other Northern European neighbours know very well. So forestry could be a much bigger part of our economy in the future. It could be a much bigger part of restoring the biodiversity loss as well as addressing climate change.